I think we should, yeah, we'll call, yeah. We'll call the Finance Property Committee meeting to order. Alderperson Blazer was excused, Alderperson Kellogg will be sitting in for him. Agenda item, well, we should probably go around the room and state our name.
Human Resources.
Zach Link, Mayor.
Adam Kagan, Community Development.
Jake Hadnall, Alderperson.
Mike Leishner, Media.
Mark Weeks, OBG.
Robert Rossetti, Top.
Mark D'Souza, Metallica.
Charlotte Whitmore, OBG.
Scott Kellogg, Alderman.
Kelly Ryan, Encourage.
Tom Realm, Alderman.
Joe Zerflu, Alderperson. Agenda item number 2, presentation by Metalco Incorporated. 2A is an open session. Now we'll let the presentation go first, I think, before we read the rest of that. Go ahead, sir.
All right, sorry.
No, not a
Jumped in a
problem.
little bit too early there, but I just wanted to thank everyone for coming. And, you know, we sort of want to keep this very open, back and forth, ask any questions at any time, obviously. What I think a good start would be maybe, you know, Mark, if you can just talk about the site first. And we've got a neat little artistic rendering that we've done of the building, and I can walk you through that from an operational and business perspective. And if I can get this on screen too, I've got some live camera footage of all our plants right now in operation. Sorry, 3 of the 4 plants in operation. But I think it would be good for you to see our last greenfield build, and from an internal perspective, and seeing what we do essentially. So, if you want to.
Yeah, that sounds good. So people are probably already aware, this is the proposed property up here. It's the corner of the existing Commerce Drive and 48th Street North. It's this 54-acre lot and this 5+ acre lot, all told probably around 60.1 acres roughly when it's all said and done. The existing city-owned property to the south here will remain, outlots 1 and 2. And a lot of, I think what we're looking there is to maintain the use that they currently do for some of the other industry to the west of us, which is some of these retention basins that are down here. There's an easement or right-of-way for the ATC high voltage line that comes through, and then there's the rail spur that currently ends right here. So the rail will be extended over to the property, and a spur that will come up onto the property. And again, like Robert mentioned, we've got a nice rendering that'll show kind of the finished product, at least from what we're envisioning at this point in time. I'll jump to that and it'll become a little clearer, but I thought I'd just kind of give a quick overview from a utility perspective. Looking to probably use this southern portion, the city-owned lot, as well for one of the retention basins, similar to what we have over here. One of the challenges we have is with the very flat property and the shallow groundwater that we have out here. The good news is it's very good sandy soil, so the percolation rates are really good. But the challenge will be when we're doing pits and when we're doing stormwater drainage and retention and grading, will be to make sure that we get all the proper grading and stormwater management for the facility. What will happen up here, I don't know if you can see from the glare, but this existing East Commerce Drive will be turned over as part of the certified survey map as part of the property as well, and become the kind of the driveway that comes into the new plant. The plant will be located on this western 20-ish acres of the total 60-acre plot. It'll be fenced, and basically the remaining portion of this lot will remain undeveloped at this point. There are existing utilities for both. WWLC owns a water line. There's a water main that runs up through here, runs down to this area, as well as a sanitary sewer that's buried and it runs up along this side of the property. So those are a couple of the utilities that we'll be looking to tie into for the project. We've spoken with We Energies, looking to bring a new gas main to the site. I believe they're going to probably come across here around Commerce Drive and then come onto the property here. Talked also to the folks at WWLC on the electrical side. They're going to bring a new 13.2 kV line medium voltage line to the site, put a meter here, and then bring one feed into the facility for the power service. Trying to think, any questions or anything so far? That kind of, it's trying to cover it from more of the outside, the external utilities, and where a lot of these handoff points are going to be. If not, I can jump into this is kind of what the finished product is going to look like. This angle will be from the northwest a little bit, looking at the plant. But as mentioned, the new driveway coming off Commerce Drive, that's existing tree line. We'll try to leave as much of that intact as possible. I think that provides a nice buffer, and it's a good tree lot to maintain. We'll have a driveway come in. It widens a little bit for some truck staging for temporary purposes. It'll come down, we'll have a truck turnaround at the end, and then we'll have employee parking, a driveway into there. This is for a truck loading, like a stake rack type truck load and unload area. As you can kind of see on here vaguely, there's a fence that'll go around the entire property. And there, oh, I'm sorry, it goes back up here. The rail, so there's two main gates into the plant right now. One across the rail for the rail service that's coming up. This spur will come up here on the south end. And then there's also a gate, automatic gate that's up here at the north end. This is for the truck traffic onto the property. The primary, it's incoming product basically for the process. They'll come in via rail. I think we're looking at something on the range of half a dozen rail cars
Yeah,
per week.
4 or 5 per week on average.
Yep. Okay. And then basically the balance of the scrap product that will come in, the primary scrap storage is indoors. There's additional scrap storage outdoor here for overflow. Product basically, we can get into this a little bit actually. If Robert, you can see the process, it'll help give you a real visual what's going on under the roof out here basically. And then final product will come out over at this end, and basically there's a truck scale with a scale house here to weigh incoming product as well as trucks that are leaving the plant. And let's see, that's generally it, I guess, at a high level, without really getting into the hood, so to speak.
So you say the incoming rail cars per week will be 4 to 5, so that's one engine and then just 4 to 5 cars per week? Or is that 4 different?
Just the 4 rail cars. The idea is to shunt them either with a truck mobile. They'll be dropped off at that CN line at their spur across the street, and then we'll shunt them in, unload them as best we can or as quick as we can, and then move them back on their main line for them to pick up.
So in terms of what we're used to rail around here, we got trains going all day, every day, this is not going to be the case.
No, I don't think it's
Okay.
gonna be that
No,
Because one concern I've had is just when people hear that there's more train coming in, is the noise that
Right.
comes with it and the traffic stoppage. Okay.
Right, yeah. And even from an engine perspective, I think there's a car mover.
Yeah, I call it a track mobile, right?
That's in use currently.
Yeah, I think the company is ECC Corrosion. I think it's them that has one. It looks pretty new, and we've already spoken to them, I think, Mark, and
Yeah.
they're open to shunting stuff for us
Yeah.
across, right? So we'd be their machinery, and we'd probably set up some sort of agreement with them where they just kind of put it on our site, and when we call them, they could take it back, right?
So low train traffic, and then maybe you guys will get to this, but it sounds like all the outgoing product then will be via truck.
Correct.
And how much do you expect of that per
So,
week?
yeah, so the way, from a ramp-up perspective on this plant, conservatively, we're gauging 3 years. Okay?
Mhm.
It'll probably come in a lot quicker than that, just for the sheer volume and just the extruders in the area that we're going to be selling to. Right now, the plant capacity of this is in and around 230 million pounds a year. So if we compare this volume with an existing plant that we currently have, which is our first plant up in Canada, we're in and around that same volumes, and we're averaging anywhere around 30 to 35 trucks per day in and out. of that facility up there. So I'm using that as a baseline.
Right.
But that's, again, full capacity.
Full capacity. And maybe it's too early to tell this, but I assume the truck routes would be straight out to 54 and then, okay, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there'll be no south, no truck
They
traffic to
make
the
a right
south,
out of there and up north, yeah.
once they get onto 48.
Okay. How about during the building of the plant? Because I had one person call me that lives out in the area and they're worried about increased traffic, what would be coming from, I believe, the south and not from 54. Is there any going to be back and forth between there?
From the south of there, that drive.
Well,
Down
just-
from Washington?
Yeah, down from
below?
Washington, yeah.
I think ultimately, the majority of construction-related traffic will still come from up above, like off Plover, or
Okay,
from the
okay.
north side, I think. Not to say that some local contractors,
Right,
right.
may or may
Yeah, I
not,
was
but I
gonna
would
say.
think the majority of the
Right.
traffic will still come and go from the north side.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. All right, so some other ancillary things I think that are located outside that you'll see. There's a set of cooling towers that's outside that helps provide cooling water for the process. There's a water treatment building that goes with that. There's some argon storage and condensing equipment out here as well. Couple of bag houses for some emission control on the discharge of some of these furnaces. And then on the front side here, it's similar. There's some homogenizing furnaces with some existing stacks for products of combustion. And then these are kind of giant ducts almost for like a cooler type system where it really just kind of, it's an intake and a discharge of air to cool down the product at that point in time. One loading dock here, and then one you don't see on the back for, this is for into the maintenance area. This is the administration part of the building, the maintenance building and warehouse here.
So if you look at the building and just take it in sections, I guess, as Mark, referred to, if we go from left to right, we've got our scrap, sort of our main in-feed area. When you look at that raw material that we use in our product, approximately 75% of it is actually scrap aluminum. And the scrap aluminum that we bring in, that make up that 75%, 25% of that, typically to 30%, is procured and purchased via our sister company, Triple M Metal, and the remainder is through our customers. So Metalco's business model is such that if we have an extruder customer, for example, Crystal Finishing, which you may or may have heard of, they will be one of our customers. They extrude product, they generate a lot of scrap. We have a trailer fleet of over 300 trailers within our complete plant system, but we offer those trailers in to collect that scrap and bring it back into the plant. We unload it, and from that, they can convert that into finished product. So just think of it like a bank account. If you're an extruder, you're giving me scrap, it goes into as a deposit. When you order product from me, I just deplete your bank account and give you pound for pound basically back to you as finished product. So again, very unique to our business model, certainly differentiates Metalco from primary producers such as Alcoa and Rio Tinto. And again, that makes up most of our in-feed. The rail, and as Mark referred to, it's primarily going to be for inbound material. That material are ingots. I can show you on live feed, but just big square blocks of pure aluminum that come in from Rio Tinto and Alcoa, and they make up the remaining 25% of our overall in-feed. So 75% scrap, 25% of that ingot. So again, scrap in the back, customer specification, it's like a recipe. They want us to develop a certain grade alloy, and we'll pick from various bins depending on what that recipe says, and move it into a charge car, which I can show you on here, and that charge car will move into position with our furnaces, and we'll push that scrap directly into the furnaces for melting. Once the consistency and the chemical specs are reached, that furnace then tilts, and liquid aluminum will pour into another holding furnace or a casting furnace, and then that furnace will lower, and another charge of scrap will, for the next customer, gets put in place. That holding furnace then gets tilted again once we've tested, make sure it is the spec, and then finally when it gets tilted, it gets poured into the casting table and formed into the billet that our customer is looking for. Once the cast is complete, we strip the pits, we pull the logs out of the pits, and they go through another process called homogenization. So there's more furnaces, and you can see it. So here's basically your scrap area outside, and we have some dedicated for inside. Your furnace section. This is your casting building, and then once out cast, you've got some homogenization equipment. That's what these stacks are for, and these vents. And we've got some saw systems that will cut that billet to your size that you're looking for, and out the door it goes. So that's in a nutshell really the process. Pretty simple, but it's pretty efficient. So do you want to see just some of that, how that kind of looks from an internal perspective? I can show you that. You can just unplug it. It's over here.
Do you have an HDMI?
I do.
On the recording or the Facebook live feed, I think we'll be able to see what's on the TV for this, or just from that.
Is it big like the shaver sometimes?
What's that?
It's not like council chambers where they can tie.
Thank you.
No, we do not. Sorry, guys, I don't have an HDMI. Isn't that it? No, that's not it. Oh, well.
It's kind of small, but if you just sort of look
I
this
don't know if
way.
you guys can see this, but.
There's one other cord in this box here.
Adapter.
Do you?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, your USB would work.
Yeah, yes, you. This would be VGA. Yes. Tie that mess of cords in there.
You do.
I'm too, yeah.
It's embarrassing. Does the plant have better technology?
We were getting to that.
This one may actually have to go into that box over there.
I've never hooked up that way.
Good question.
Oh, yeah, there's a spot.
Is it?
Okay.
I can just a little more cord from you.
Maybe a little bit more room.
Can see where it would go, but there's something else there. I'm just plugging it in over here, which sometimes is. We use it so frequently, I don't remember.
Do anything square like that on there?
Maybe not.
No, if it doesn't work, maybe we can just turn this around. So it's not in, right? Okay. Yeah, let's just turn it around. Hopefully you all can see this, but. So this gives you this is a live feed right now. This is our latest plant, our Lordstown, Ohio plant. Actually give you a true live feed. So this is our scrap building. You can see the bins here, and we get scrap in various forms. This particular area, it's 60,000 square feet. This will be, our plant here in Wisconsin will be a lot smaller, but we're sharing this space with our sister company, Triple M Metal. So this side of the scrap area is Metalco's. The other side, I'll show you now, is Triple M Metal. So this is Triple M Metal side here. You can see a baler. And it's specific their non-ferrous operation. So having them under one roof for us certainly benefits us on the procurement side of things. And then moving from the scrap area, I want to show you the furnaces. So I don't know if you can see them, but we've got 2 furnaces here. Let me just see if I can go to an area where they were. So you can see some of the. I'd like to show you actually scrap being charged in the furnace. I'm trying to pick a spot here where it was. Okay, well, why don't we, what typically happens is we've got the 2 furnaces here. A charge car full of scrap will come across in rails and position itself in front of one of these 2 furnaces. Our proposed plant, that will have 1 tilting furnace, and I think I can show you it being tilted. I think it was just tilting a few minutes ago. Let's see. At least I can show you that. Oh, okay, so here you go. All right, so if I just play this part here, you can see now one of the furnace doors is opening. The scrap charging machine is starting to slowly sort of position itself in front of that furnace. And what it'll do is as it positions itself, it will move into the furnace and push that scrap in and retract. So it just dumps everything in and layer it on top of either the scrap that's already in there or the molten metal. So this is certainly typical of what you would see at our plant that we're proposing right now. Same size furnace, same process. Let's see if I can speed this up a little bit. So it dumps the scrap in. Now it's retracting back there. So those are our tilter melters, and then we go to the actual casting area. If I go back here to around 4:15, I believe. Was it 4:15, guys? Thanks for reminding me. I want to make sure that we can see. Okay. So I can play this now. Actually. Okay, so that is essentially our pit area, and what's happening in this process right now, it's being stripped of the logs. The cast is complete. What happened? The cylinder will push up these logs to a point where a crane will come over and row by row just pull them out of that pit. And you can see that here. They get moved over where they'll be fed in. Yeah, it will be on that side there. And I can show you that area. So these are our furnaces where all the homogenization goes. The billets are stacked, loaded, put on a card, and whatever available furnace is ready for the next homo charge, it'll position itself in front of that and push those logs in. Just consider these are just ovens, and you know, they're set at various times and temperatures depending upon the alloy that our customer wants. Once they've heated to that time and temperature, they're taken out of the oven, and these two blue units there are the coolers, and they'll cool down that metal, take it back, and then feed it into our saw area. And that's kind of, well, let me show you. Yeah, you can see in this picture here. In our Lordstown plant, we actually have 3 saws. We're only going to have 1 saw in our proposed plant here, but sorry, that gives you kind of an idea. And that's it. And then saws are the logs are cut to size and out into our receiving area or shipping area. And you can see our inventory there in Lordstown. And that's basically it, folks.
Have to do an arrangement plan, but that's kind of, and the GA plan and everything too.
It looks a little too busy.
It is, it's very busy.
I think that visually kind of gives you a quick overview of, in real time type of view and what we do. Is there any questions on that process at all, or?
Yeah, I don't necessarily have any questions. Thank you for the overview, but the one thing the public can't see what's on the TV right now outside of what's on the camera, is my understanding. So is there any way we could get a copy of the rendering, or if you have some type of video that you put together for PR relations that we could get out there when people ask questions, then we could
Point to
maybe
something.
point up to something, yeah.
Sure, they give you a copy of that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions? Adam?
I mean, one of the reasons that I wanted Metelco to come before you guys is I know one question that I've received from other alderpersons and the public is really related to the emissions. Seems to be the biggest question that I've received. So I believe your permitting person is here who will be in charge of that. So it may be something worthwhile to hear kind of an overview of what process they have to go through, how they mitigate any potential issues with that.
Sure. So I would be the permitting person.
I'm sure you have a different type that's more impressive.
Well, you know, not really. Permitting person works. So, I mean, obviously, as part of any operation like this, you know, they need to get an air permit, you know, for construction and operation. So we're working with the Wisconsin DNR to, you know, secure that permit. You know, and as part of that, obviously, you know, the facility undergoes a full applicable requirements review, make sure that, you know, the appropriate air pollution control, as Mark had mentioned before, is in place to meet those requirements. In addition, as part of that application submittal, there's a air dispersion modeling analysis to, you know, assess the emissions from the plant and, you know, how make sure it's going to comply with the relevant ambient air quality standards. And so we're in the process of preparing all of that and hopefully submitting it very soon. We've already had discussions with DNR regarding the submittal and you know, what they were going to need in order to facilitate the process. So I mean, I think we're in pretty good shape there. You know, obviously Metelco runs several of these facilities. It's not their first rodeo. And there's, you know, there's federal requirements in place in addition to the state level requirements. You know, to protect the ambient air, and things like the bag houses obviously are intended to do that with lime injection and to control some of the air emissions. I don't know if there's additional details from that I can share, or
Is there any, I guess, is there any odor associated with it or anything like that?
I mean, maybe you guys can speak better to that. Unfortunately, odor is a very subjective,
Right.
as we all know, I think, around the room.
I think nothing more than any, you know, industrial manufacturer would emit. It's
Okay.
For us, it's normal.
Maybe the question is more, is it more localized, or is it an order that, just from experience, we had, I think we talked about that early in our conversations, we have an industrial user that we didn't quite expect that they were going to emit such an odor that would travel throughout the community and neighborhoods. And I realize you're on a different part of town than them, and your process is very different, and you're not involving food, it's metal, you know, there's just a whole number of different variables. But I think maybe the question more is from a localized sense versus a ability to travel distances.
Right, and I guess to the mayor's point, the issue that we had last year was not just, I mean, it was like smog or something, you know, like the actual particles in the air, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So aesthetic, like, is your...
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, that
No, that's...
we don't have any of that. Sometimes when we are processing some painted scrap, I mean, we'll get some of that. But odor-wise, it's nothing out of the ordinary. If it's anything, it's local within the plant. So we've, you know, in all the plants that we've had, we've never had a complaint. So I can say that, right?
How many plants do you have?
Right now, 4.
Okay.
This will be our 5th.
And you've been in operation for,
So a little bit of history. I think I could have started with that also. You know, our first plant was in Toronto. That's when we got into this business. Again, Triple M Metal, through their scrap business, they just wanted to move up the supply chain. Thought this certainly blends in well with what they do. The plant was built and commissioned in Toronto December of 2005. We had our first cast then. So that is our oldest plant. We bought a plant out of Canton, Ohio in 2010 out of receivership. That became our second plant. Lordstown, Ohio is our greenfield project. It was a $100 million project, 225,000 square foot building, and it was commissioned, fully commissioned in March of 2016. And just last year, we bought a major competitor of ours and closed that transaction January 31st of 2018. And that plant is, I think they commissioned that plant in 2008. So within the last, our plants are within the last 10 to 13 years in terms of age.
thank you, yeah, it's good to know if anybody asks that in
Yeah.
13 years over 4 plants.
4 plants,
There hasn't
yeah.
been one complaint in terms of,
Yep.
so, well, thank you. That's, yeah, that's all I got.
Okay.
Do you want to maybe walk through the employment components a bit? I know it's been out there in the public domain. Maybe talk a little bit about the various levels of skill.
Yep.
And then...
Okay, no, we're anticipating, again, conservatively, about 80 new hires, permanent full-time staff. Again, the ramp-up of the plant, we're going over 3 years, but I think we'll be staffed up before that at the 80 employee number. In terms of the skilled versus unskilled, I would say we're going to need production workers, we're going to need forklift drivers. Then we move into more skilled individuals in electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, metallurgists. We're going to need a general manager for the plant, an HR representative, administrative folks, accounting type individuals. Yeah. When you look at the breakdown, I would say 10 to 12 of those 80 will be skilled engineers, metallurgists, and the remaining will be production personnel. But they have to have a level of skill. I mean, when you're operating around some of these furnaces, you need to know what you're doing. So we have a very comprehensive training program. We have sort of a round robin where we're going to take people, hiring here and working through the plant system so they see the various processes. And that's part of the training program that we have established.
And then maybe you can talk about the schedule, construction schedule, now that these folks are more engaged and address the local contractors, or at least the bid process of which you're going to employ? I know just it's a
Yeah.
question we've been getting, and since this is on live recording, I think it bears repeating.
Just one more question while we're on the same topic. So for the production workers, do you know what the average pay range would be for them? Obviously, it's going to be different than the other plants based on where we're at
We're
geographically. but-
anticipating starting off at around $15, $50 of the unskilled, and then moving up to skilled could be, $23, $24 range.
Thank you.
And to your question, Mr. Mayor, do you want to talk a little bit about how, what stage you're at on the construction side and
Yeah,
qualifying
sure.
as well?
So from a construction side, we're right now in the, so we're doing the design, the procurement, and the construction portion of this kind of in an EPCM approach, I guess, engineer, procure, construction, manage. We're currently on the upfront phases of the site design, some of those other things that we want to make sure we can get our, some of the things that are in the ground, like the pits and things like that, utility connections, working with the rail spur design and things like that on the surface. We've got from a schedule perspective, we're trying to get ourselves lined up and we've got a building package that also has to go out. So there's basically going to be a pre-engineered metal building package that will go out to some suppliers and erectors for that. That process will probably be going on in the next couple of weeks. Site civil design will also happen. What we're trying to do is line up with when the air permit is finally is issued and approved, when we can get to that point, and we're able to go ahead and break ground and do some foundation work and kind of, other than site development in the upper clearing, grubbing type equipment or processes. So we're talking probably early summertime, hopefully early to mid-summertime, till when we're ready to start really getting into the nitty-gritty construction phase for this. We're hoping at that point that the building and everything moves along, and that by, I usually say snowfall, but when it gets very inclement weather, we're hoping to have the building basically kind of dried in, if you will. Foundation's complete, structure up, and walls and roof in, at which point we'll try to have, it should time out pretty well with someone when the major equipment is going to show up. That obviously doesn't want to be left out in the elements, as you can imagine. So what we're looking at, that's kind of on a bigger scale, where we're looking, and then probably by middle of 2020, having the equipment installed, having all the mechanical and electrical work completed, going through a bunch of the startup scenarios with all the different vendors and suppliers. And we're shooting for, middle of 2020 for first cast. I was going to address the contractor's perspective. We've had a bunch of solicitations, which has been good, to get a lot of local or semi-local contract, and the contracting community's reached out to us very, I won't say aggressively, but nice. It's helped us. So we're going through a pre-qualification process now. The way we approach it is it's kind of in packages. So we'll do like a site package first. So we'll look for some of those site contractors that do the dirt work and the excavation and the grading and things like that, and the utility contractors that'll do that kind of thing. And then as we move further down the line, we'll look for some of the building folks and the concrete people and so on as the building, as you can kind of see it taking shape. So like those, the detailed, mechanical, and then the electrical, and some of the startup, specialists will come in a little bit later on in the process. So that's kind of the process of how it goes. But like I said, we've had a bunch of reach outs from, dozens, I think, already of contractors that are on the list, which has been great. It's helping our process as well. So, did that answer the question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Good.
Okay. So, how many, at any one time, how many contractors do you expect to have people staying in like our local hotels or eating at our restaurants? I know that's been one question that a lot of people ask me is, during the construction of this, what type of influx of people are we going to see coming in to support those businesses?
Yeah.
I know it's a hard.
It
thing to
is
put your
tough,
number,
right?
But if there's any range.
I can give you an idea. With Lordstown at its peak, we had 140 people on the ground. And I remember that number clearly. I think it was a little bit above, but I thought, wow, there's a lot of people working. We got to be careful in how we obviously, stage. We don't
Right.
want people tripping over themselves, but I would say conservatively 100 people working on this site at its peak.
Yeah.
And, we've already engaged some people, local hotels and so on, to give them a heads up that this is coming. We've looked at some corporate rates with them, so, yeah, it's going to be pretty active.
Very exciting. Remains exciting.
Yes, most definitely.
Thank you for your patience, and it's been a pleasure working so far on the project.
Any other questions?
No.
Are we sure?
Just a question, late in the game, I guess. In this wide open area that there is would there be any consideration given towards any, with this new talk of green energy, not new, but going green and all that, with solar energy of any type or anything to be looked at? And the cost is there too, but...
I don't want to say no, but there's really nothing been in the pipeline right now with all our plans to really address anything like that, to my knowledge anyways. Within the Giampaolo group of companies, certainly it's all about, recycle, right? And is there any projects for
We've got,
you?
as part of the group of companies, we've got a lot of different businesses. We've got our electronic recycling company across southern Ontario and parts of Costa Rica is well known as GEEP. They just exclusively handle electronics, so outdated data and stuff like that. And all the precious metals are taken out of those particular gizmos and gadgets and recycled back in. So we have a business exclusively that just handles electronics. Robert touched upon the scrap metal side of it as well, so everything is repurposed as opposed to it ending up in a landfill site. We're always trying to see how we can apply those sort of...
Yeah, I guess what I was getting at is with the solar energy as far as powering the plant.
Right, yeah, no,
Okay.
that's right.
Has anything ever been looked at with that?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
So this far. That's not to say it's not being discussed at
I've been
one
asked
level.
that by
Yeah,
people.
for sure,
and
for sure.
I think that's best addressed where we're buying our power, I think at the utility level, right? Knowing that they're going to be a substantial customer, are there economies of scale for us to be buying, since we don't produce any of our own power locally, we're buying everything that's being consumed in our area, might there be opportunities for us to have more modern power purchasing, modern in the sense of less environmentally intensive power sources? And I think the utilities looked at some of that, but maybe it's incumbent upon us to be asking the utility what they're considering. But I appreciate that question, because I think I've gotten a similar question too.
Okay, agenda item number 2A, in open session, the committee may vote to go into closed session under section 19.85, parent 1, parent E of the Wisconsin statutes, which reads, deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business, whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. Sub B, in closed session, the committee will discuss negotiations and strategy regarding 1, a purchase and sale agreement for parcels 34-09861 and 34-09863 between the city and Metalco Incorporated. 2, a development agreement between the city and Metalco Incorporated. 3, an existing development agreement between the city and Encourage Community Foundation. Item 2, sub C, the committee will return to open session. Look for a motion to go into closed session.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
Motion second to go into closed session, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? And we will be in closed session. I'm sorry, I should have took a roll call vote. I think we got it. Approval of a purchase and sale agreement for parcels 34-09861 and 34-09863 between the city and Metalco Incorporated. And I'll make a motion to approve the purchase and sale agreement for those parcels.
I will second that.
Motion and second to approve. Any discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 3-0. Item number 5 is review and consider approval of a development agreement between the city and Metalco Incorporated. I'll also make a motion to approve the development agreement.
I will second it.
Motion and second to approve. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 3-0. Item number 6 is overview of next steps and process moving forward for the Metalco Incorporated development.
And I think we probably covered that in kind of the presentation where they covered the construction timeline. Just from a more formal stance, obviously they're working on the air permit. That's probably the next key thing. They have submitted for their site plan approval, so that will be coming before the Planning Commission in April. And once those are done, the next item will be that they'll have to submit their building plans to the state to get state-approved plans. And then, so once we have the air permit, the state-approved plans, then we'll be able to issue local permits and project can break ground. So that's where we're at currently.
So it doesn't require a motion, does it?
No, that was just so that everyone would know where are we
No,
now.
just make sure.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And again, but one of the key things, because we've gotten the question from the community, is that we would not issue permits and ground cannot break until that air permit is in hand.
Right.
So that has been probably the biggest concern we've received.
Okay. Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 7, consider financing options, bid letting, and schedule related to the Community Development Investment Grant and 3rd Avenue South.
Well, I'll cover a portion of this since Adam had to step out, and we can fill in the gaps, and hopefully we can make our way through this. So, back in 2015, the city approved a grant, agreed to pursue a grant to support the Tribune Building project. The city was the applicant and then ultimately designated that for the benefit of the development. That grant was awarded to the city of 470 some thousand and change. And then since that time, since 2015, the WDC, there's actually a stipulation in the grant that required the grant to be expended within 2 years, or at least, unless there was some other agreement made otherwise. So since that time in 16, 17, and 18, the city supported applications for extension to the WDC. And Encourage had provided a number of updates to the WDC about its progress and where it was planning and any pivots that they were having or any modifications to their original scope to the project. So then, most recently, WDC inquired about the status of the project and had indicated, based upon their underwriter's review, and I'm summarizing a lot here, so feel free, Kelly, if since you're here, if there's anything you want to add into the discussion. We were all made aware that WDC was not willing to provide another 1-year extension to the previous extensions that they had done, and had indicated that if there wasn't going to be any sort of, what do I call it?
The project wasn't.
Draw, if it wasn't
Draw,
going to be drawn.
what was the trigger? They could draw, that if there wasn't another match or a triple match to their, or double match to their single match, the grant would have to be returned to WDC, and that's obviously a very large concern to us because it was a large sum of money. We put a lot of faith in that grant application and decided at early time to not pursue any other grant application. So we wanted, it's our first motivation and discussion is to retain this money in the community. And Adam had shared a summary of the discussions that he had representing the city and what Encourage had discussed most recently with the folks at WDC. So you all have that in your packets, and we can walk through elements of that if you wish. But basically WDC said, okay, looking at the original application, and which called for building improvements and renovations of the Tribune building, but also exterior improvements on the property that the city had previously transferred ownership to the foundation on. In looking at the grant application, it appeared that there might be some qualifying expenses within there that we had previously identified, actually, for exterior improvements. The original grant application had the WDC grant being applied toward those exterior improvements in the original financial information that was shared with WDC. So since that time, and saying to WDC, we'd really not like the dollars to leave the community, what if we were to consider disjoining the sequence of the improvements? That parking lot's in rough shape. The city has long talked about what if it were to realign the street. We had cost estimates done in 2014, and because it would capture some real estate for some higher and better use. The property just adjacent to the Tribune Building, the Centralia Center looks nice, but it doesn't really offer a tremendous amount of value. And talking to the seniors over there quite frequently, the raised bed gardens are no longer functional, they're obsolete, they actually don't work with their physical limitations for some of them when they're gardening. So basically providing some level of public support for the fact that that property may be able to be used for a higher purpose. So since WDC's conversations, we've dusted off some of the cost estimates of realignment of the street, and then have talked most recently about community need, the farmer's market, and getting the farmer's market in a permanent location. Farmer's market folks had done an outreach with a survey last summer and fall, and offered a couple of locations. One, the west side, became the primary and most desired site for the market. They wanted to keep it downtown, not relocated out of the kind of downtown core. And so the First Avenue and up Goggins Street and Johnson Street ended up being the top, though the farmers market folks have told me the alternative, the Market Square parking lot, which Encourage has ownership of, came up to be a very close first. It was really indifferent in terms of the results and the weighting. So that concept and idea was put in front of WDC, and Encourage had shared multiple updates, even most recently, as to where the project stood in terms of a project update. And we wanted to put this on your radar, since WDC has given us informal notice, or a level of formal notice, that the grant could not be extended past 2019. Am I missing any material details from your memo? Or
Yeah, I mean, one thing I will note is Encourage has been very supportive of doing everything possible to try and keep the grant funds in the community. So realizing that obviously this is a large amount of money that they don't want to see leave the community either. So that has been appreciated, that they're willing to maybe take some things out of order. But yeah, as far as the overall grant, it is the 3-to-1 match, and I don't know if you had mentioned that in your overview. I apologize that I stepped out for a little bit, but ultimately there are two main components, one being the street straightening, which would be, project estimate is about $425, and then the rest would be the improvements to that recaptured 1.67 or 1.69 acres, and that would most likely consist of parking lot improvements. So it would be a functional recapture of parking within the downtown, which, as all you aldermen know, is a little bit of a hot topic right now with the YMCA and the VA Center, and then obviously the potential need for the Tribune Building when that is up and operational. And then the other aspect of that would be some sort of farmer's market to give it more of a permanent feel. That can be anything from just raised concrete areas that would be utilized for the market, but all the way to something that would be a more permanent structure. The concept that kind of was at least floated to the state was, if you're familiar with, I call it Oso's parking lot. I think it's something.
Mikey's and
yeah, but that development, they have the structure running through the middle of the parking lot. It's about 20 feet wide, covered. If a structure similar to that could potentially be incorporated into it, that would provide the shelter for the people shopping, and then vendors could back up to that with their, basically setting up their booths on the sides of it. So something like that overall. Those costs, we did identify what Stevens Point had done for theirs. I don't have the costs for what the Plover improvement actually cost, because that was partially done privately. It wasn't necessarily a public improvement, but the Stevens Point market was about 1.1 million. So that's kind of where we landed on that overall budget of 1.5.
And we have no cost estimates really, other than what Adam just mentioned, because we don't have a design, right? We haven't settled on what any of these improvements might be, that would be putting the cart way before the horse as far as I'm concerned, because, you know, the council, while approved the original grant request, and the subsequent extensions have been awarded, we haven't talked about any potential change in direction or change in sequencing as it relates to use of that property.
So the goal is to keep the money in the community, right?
That'd be the primary goal, and I think to address community needs as it relates to it. WDC offered no flexibility to utilize that grant anywhere outside of the bounds of the project as it was defined in the original grant application. So it wasn't like we could take it and use it for the triangle development, right? So then that's gonna have to, will likely require some TIF involvement or other involvement, so there was no flexibility there.
So it's looking for an option to use the funds still in the area that they were designated, but needing to do it this year to lose them. Okay.
And it's a tight schedule, get this done too.
Yes. So the idea would be to get some concurrence on concept and then financing, of course. There would be, I think in Adam's memo, there's about a $700,000 gap as it's just identified today, which would be the road realignment costs and any of the remaining improvements. That's if we were to maximize the grant. If we were to have a smaller project, well then the grant support scales downward. So we wouldn't utilize the entire grant if the project came in less than what Adam had shared.
Can I add to that? I think
Yes.
It would be work that likely would be done regardless, and it is timing, right? So we would put in a portion of and be able to draw down some of that grant. It likely was given to us earlier in the stage of the project than would have been best in terms of utility because it was outdoor improvements. So doing parking, bringing farmer's market down closer, all of that would have happened, will happen, right? And we can put in, I think we worked with WEDC, so we came to the city and said, we'd like to make sure that if we can think about using this differently, if you're thinking about straightening Third Avenue anyway, what's the possibility of accelerating that right now so that we can keep some of this money in the community? And that was really the frame for it. So it might not work to accelerate it, and that's fine. We can still draw down some of it. Encourages putting in like $270,000 to help draw down some of that match component. And then of course you've heard recently that the governor has allocated $3 million in his budget for Tribune, and that we'll have a public announcement on that tomorrow morning with a press conference on additional good news at the Tribune tomorrow morning. So we feel very good about where the Tribune is headed now after periods of time, and we think frankly it's a much stronger and better project with partners doing what they're doing downtown and having the Y and the Boys and Girls Club in that proximity. And you have this connection point between the Y, the Boys and Girls Club, Centralia, and then down to the Tribune, right in that spot there. And we would want to strengthen that regardless, right, for connectivity between all of those, get the seniors connected to the river, to the Tribune, and the opportunities. But it is sequencing, so it traditionally would have been done after construction of the building or simultaneously. And we did, I would just say, we did a lot of demolition expense on the front end, and even the parking lot agreement. It was all done like 2 weeks before we got the WEDC grant, unfortunately, because all of that expenditure would have qualified to draw down some of the grant. And they've been great. I mean, the city's been great, WEDC has been great to work with, and they'll continue to be great and support the project.
I think that makes an easy decision, then keep the money in the community and use it for what we can, right? I guess I'll entertain a motion to Pursue and explore a concept for the Market Square parking lot and Third Avenue, conditional upon grants and other private funding.
I'll second it.
Does that make sense?
Motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion?
Just repeat the motion. Yeah.
That's all right.
Adam's frantic writing here and.
All right.
I gotta go through like all my notes here, but explore motion conditional upon, or explore a concept for Market Square parking lot and Third Avenue additional upon grants and private funding. And those are the 2 areas of focus that we mentioned, right?
Realignment of Third Avenue, the market.
Right.
And then,
Was there anything else?
no, it was just more of this, I mean, the whole space.
Yeah, that was just-
talking about.
Okay.
Grants and private funding. Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 3-0.
And so we'll continue to provide updates since that is an accelerating item. Once WDC provides some concurrence, and then if, we'll do a call out to folks that have said, well, we'd like to help see this happen or make it happen somewhere and see if there's any appetite for financing. If there isn't appetite, then frankly, or if it's infeasible from an acceleration from a public works standpoint, Public Works has reacted to it saying it's beyond aggressive in terms of the schedule. It would be an act of God to make this happen in terms of scheduling. So perhaps we may have an act, in our pocket of God that maybe can make it happen. So I guess expect updates from us on that front, and then we may need to call special meetings, to button up various aspects of this project.
But with this, at least we're moving towards, making an attempt to keep it in,
Yeah,
right?
the concept, right? You agree in some form with the concept.
Right. All right.
Okay. Agenda item number 8, consider financing options, bid letting, and schedule updates for the pool project at Winterfield.
Adam? So the last time we met on the pool project, we talked about, we provided an update based upon the schedule of construction, when we might need to let the project for bidding if we're going to open it in 2020. Also provided an update on fundraising. And there was some question and discussion around everyone, their view of the need and how soon we want to address the need and what were the benefits to getting a project underway from a cost standpoint in terms of avoiding future cost increases if we don't get construction underway. So staff and I worked on a couple of elements that we'd like to share with you all. And Tim, do you have the first handout? Oh, this one here, yeah. So basically, we asked the contractor, thank you. We asked MSA to come up with, I'm going to stand up because I'm sitting back in the corner. We had MSA come up with a cash flow on the project. So the bottom half of that page, the funding scenario page, has what MSA believes will be the payment schedule for construction. So this is post letting the project for bid and then post award. Because the question was, well, how much do we need to? When is the cash necessary for the schedule of the construction? So as you see, the total funding in 2019 required is about half the project, a little bit under half, 5.2 million, and then the remaining half being necessary in 2020, really starting in January of 2020. So that's the balance, the 6.4 million. And so just for easy, what are the assumptions we're incorporating in all of this? We're assuming we're going to let the project and award the project for everything. The outside the fence improvements that we have cost estimates for. So that'd be the playground, the open air shelter, stormwater improvement, site development, all of those things that are non-pool related, but that the donor that previously stepped forward for the match had said, we want you to do the whole thing. So the 2.5 million being contingent upon us doing the whole thing. So we're just moving forward in that assumption, really to develop a worst case scenario to a question that was raised in that if the city wanted to get the pool project underway, how much time do we have to raise the balance of the money necessary for construction? And what could the obligation, what could the borrowing cost be to the city? Both financing and then the issuance cost. So does that make sense? Basically, we've got $7.5 million either pledged by the city, borrowed by the city, or pledged by a private donor, leaving a really a $4 million financing gap. If we're thinking about matching the 2.5 and then the $1.5 million in round numbers for the remaining features. The pool cost is about $10 million, but it's 11.5 when you factor the other portion of the elements outside the pool facility. Was that making sense so far? Okay. So you'll see on the document the 10.541, the first column. The 10 million is the total base bid less what we've paid MSA to date. So the 644,000 we've paid them to develop the construction documents and all of the designs related to the project. That has been paid for out of the first 2.5 million that we borrowed, which gives us $1.7 million left. We'll get to that in a minute. The alternate bid is those park features and amenities, which is estimated to be 1.2 million for a total project cost of 12,395,000 less the MSA number, so 11,750,000. So everybody on the same page as far as the costs of the facility. Those things haven't changed other than the 2019 project costs are higher than the 2019 construction estimates because of basic cost of doing business adjustments. So what do we need if we're going to break ground and continue to fundraise, knowing that a number of donors have said the soonest you'll hear back from us with a pledge, giving us confidence that they will be giving us a pledge, just that they will not do it until summer. We asked MSA to come up with that payment schedule, which we just walked through a minute ago. Any questions so far on that, or am I missing any points?
One thing I just wanted to point out is as the mayor's giving this presentation, you'll recollect that in order to open in 2020, we need to advertise, we need to start advertising for bids next week. So if we want to construct it in 2019 so that it opens in 2020, at the next council meeting, there'd have to be an affirmative decision to let the project for bid, and then if the bids are found to be reasonable, accept, the lowest qualified bid. So if we were to wait until we had all of the funding, and if that happened during the calendar year, hypothetically, and we wait until next year to let the project, we anticipate our MSA, our consulting engineer, has suggested about a $500,000 increase in costs that we would have, just because of inflationary, inflationary costs and things like that. So, so that's why we are at a crossroads right now. It's not to say the project has to take place today in order to build it. We can still do it in the future. But if we're going to try to take advantage of the interest rates that exist and avoid the increase in costs moving forward, if we want to do that, we need to make a decision, and we can't wait any longer. So I just wanted to interject that.
So, so we're talking about the gap that we have between current funding and what we need to raise yet, with possibly looking at going out to find that gap and let it right now. Or we're looking at another 500 grand next year.
Correct.
Okay.
Good
I don't know if you have
clarification.
Right, so
make
if
sure
we
we're-
were to let it now, under the pretense that we're still talking to a number of potential donors, we can speculate that we may or may not be successful in raising additional funds. And so what we've asked for and what we've put together for you is worst case scenario.
Okay.
We don't get a dime.
And right, next council meeting, do you mean Tuesday?
Tuesday.
Okay.
Once we let it, we're in.
No,
Okay.
no.
Okay.
Once the project's let, bids will be advertised, contractors will review them, submit proposals. once those proposals come in, then the council has another kick at that cat. You know, if the numbers aren't appropriate, the council still would need to approve a contract, so.
Could come in over budget.
Right.
I mean, let's say it's over budget, we would say, well, we haven't planned for that. And at that point, if there's no low qualifying bid that meets our budget, we reject all the bids.
Right.
Now, it doesn't look good to the city, right? To have the contractors go through that process and all their pricing and quantities be open to the public, as has been said on other projects that we've talked about, declining to award bids at some point. But that's, I think, you know, we're on the hook when we let it to a degree, from a political capital standpoint probably, and a sort of publicity question.
Right.
Do we want to talk about the financing of the gap and what those scenarios look like? Does that make sense to move into that? So Tim put together, basically the first part is bearing in mind that $11,750,000 to build the entire project. The unspent aquatics money that's outstanding is $1.7 million. We did get a contribution from Water and Light for $100,000. That's over 2 years. And then the donations received to date are around $21,000. So that leaves a balance of $9.8 million to construct the facility. So Tim, do you want to talk about the funding scenario in the next block?
Sure, and basically what the funding scenario is just going, saying if we didn't get another commitment, because theoretically, if you let the project, accepted the bids, and awarded the contract, now you're pretty much obligated. So that if no more contributions come in, obviously the city's gonna have to finance that portion, and that's why it's broken into two bond issues, is that we have the first bond issue to cover what we anticipate will be the 2019 construction costs, plus to cover the January and February payments, because by the time we go to issuance and issue the debt on the second one, if we had to do that, we would have those funds available. So then you have that second issuance in 2020 allows you that, well, basically a year to solicit and hopefully have other contributions come in to fund that project, then lessen the public financing portion of that second bond issue. But this is basically, you know, if we were to let it award the contract, this would kind of, I'd say, I guess, if it comes in on budget, the worst case scenario as far as the amount of bonding the city would have to undertake to complete the project. And then basically down below on the second half of the page, I'm just showing you the projected bond issues, because we have other projects that we've approved in the 2019 budget, and then also putting together an estimate of the 2020 bond issue, which would include a portion for our normal public works construction, street construction projects that we do on an annual basis.
So that's about the most simplistic way for us to talk about the funding scenarios and the borrowing. We've got another handout we can walk through if there are questions.
Right.
It's a lot of numbers.
Yeah, and just to kind of point out on the unspent bond proceeds, because they're bond proceeds, we have to use those for aquatics. We cannot use those for a different public purpose, because in the bond documents it says that that was earmarked for aquatics. And next year in July I'll be coming up on 3 years. If those remain unspent after 3 years, then you're looking at having to return that to your debt service fund to pay off those bonds. So you can't just not use them indefinitely. At some point you have to return it to your debt service if you're not going to use them, and use that to fund the payments of those bonds.
I think there was a question at the last finance meeting about that, is what do we do with the funds that,
Yeah,
if we
at
want
some
to do a
point,
timeline
yeah.
issue.
So, Joe?
No, but, yeah.
Okay. So, I got some thoughts. A couple things. I think this has been going on a while. Now's the time, it sounds like, for several reasons, especially if next summer we're gonna start paying this back. It's gonna be another 500 grand. And I think we're gonna have a really hard time going around to donors without a commitment to do it or take a look at doing it this year, knowing that we could be getting 500,000 in donations that are gonna totally go to waste because we can't get this through. So I have full confidence that we will close the gap with private funding. I think there's some stuff in the works. Because this is just letting it out to bid, this isn't the yes or no. We do need to take a look at numbers and see if this is something we can or want to do. And if we don't, then that's what it is, but that'll be up for the council to decide. So with that, I'll make a motion to consider financing options, bid letting, and schedule updates, or consider financing options and bid letting for the aquatics project at Whitterfield.
I'll second.
Motion and a second.
And
So Joe, the
find that the bids might come in lower too.
Well, no one wants to do that.
I just want to make sure that this doesn't obligate us to borrow more. But
It does not.
Okay.
But I think we should clarify that, a couple questions. I mean, the council needs to clarify beyond the committee level that the majority of the council supports the project, right? And that'll have to come, whatever action is ultimately taken tonight and gets affirmed. But I think it's important to consider the entire picture of which the city's obligations from a borrowing standpoint are out there. I think the earlier we hear that information, and then ultimately when we award the project, we're gonna better understand how the city can afford to do this. But there are consequences and implications about other project needs that might come about that may or may not become, not that they won't be able to be financed, but at the end of the day, when the city borrows any money, it has to be levied against the property taxes, right? They're property tax payers. And I think we need to be cognizant of that debt service tax rate and how much of our tax rate is going to pay off our debt. And so that's what I think Tim maybe wanted to talk briefly about, just for the benefit of everybody. Because you could do it in multiple steps, but if we get to a point where we agree to let it, but then we don't agree to borrow or cover any financing gap, I think that puts us in a bad position. So I think just for everybody's benefit, we should maybe pause and I'm getting a kind of a look that we should probably understand that better, I guess. Joe, do you have a question?
No, I would like Tim to go through that.
Sure, you want me to pass?
Yeah, I think we can pass it out.
So basically what I did is, based on, where we are, where I talked about earlier about if we were to receive no more private contributions or anything that, that the city would borrow to fill the gap if we did let the project awarded the bid in the form of a contract. So I put together a long-term debt projection based on the scenarios of the 2019 bond issue, 2020 bond issue. Also, I built in there that we'll be borrowing some for the TID number 8 with the Metelco development. And I also built in there the annual note issue that we do for our street construction projects. And that's at the page 1, kind of summarize our existing debt situation up front, our outstanding debt as it is today or in 2018. And then here are the projected debt issues by year. That's what's built. Those are the assumed debt issues that are built into the projection. You flip over to the second page, page 2, and basically where you see a bold line going across, that's basically anything above that we've already committed to. That's our existing situation. Anything below that is a projected debt based on the existing debt we have right now, plus the projected debt issues. And basically this schedule just shows you kind of what happens to our total outstanding debt going forward with these issues. As it says, $20.7 million as of 12/31, and obviously with the $6 million bond issue in 2019 and the $6,380,000, it goes from 20 to 24.6 to 28.5, and then you'll see I project this out going out to 2040. Because basically, if you issue 20-year bonds, the second-year bond will be paid off in 2040. So just kind of, that's obviously getting out, a lot of things could happen between then, but just to kind of give you an idea of what we have.
And that's assuming we're going to borrow annually $1.3 million for street projects, because we have carrying our construction crew at the street department requires us to borrow a certain level to
Yeah,
help
and-
finance the construction of the
Yeah,
streets.
and then also to keep up with, the proper replacement of our streets, of doing, I think we do a mile a year, is that what we do? I think, and then, and part of funding that mile a year is, debt is part of that funding source along with tax levy. But obviously to eliminate that debt, you wouldn't obviously be able to do that with levy limits, you would not be able to add that back on the property tax, so that's why that's assumed to be built in, and it's consistent with what we've done over, probably since I started here, that pretty much every year we've issued promissory notes to help fund the public works construction, street construction projects. On
Maybe
page
before
4,
we- I was just gonna suggest, before we went off of page 2,
Sure.
above the line, so if you think back to 2010, 13, and 14, look to the amount of debt that was issued in those years, you'll see that come up later. I think it's important to note, while Tim made the comment, I've been borrowing ever since I've been here at the city, there were, even in recent memory, where we didn't borrow, and we'll talk about the implications of that later. So I just want to draw your attention to that.
on page 4, is basically what we do is, so for all that existing debt and assumed debt, kind of do some amortization schedules. So basically, the total debt service in that first column, that's basically what your principal and interest payment is on your existing debt and projected debt. Then in the second column is, we have certain sources like tax criminal debt. We have increment that we capture to pay off those. So I'm showing offsetting revenues. So for Centralia Center, we do have some lease revenues over there that help offset the bonds that we issued to construct the Centralia Center. Utility, the majority of that is in, if you remember, the 2015, we refinanced electric revenue bonds, which does not count against the city's GO debt, with general obligation debt, saving the utility significant money in doing so because they were able to take advantage of better tax exempt interest rates on that. So, but they reimburse us obviously for all that principal and interest on that. So that's where you'll see the utility offset. And then there's some other, we issued some taxable bonds back in 2003 to pay off our unfunded pension liability in the state of Wisconsin. And we allocate a portion of that to our utilities to pay that back. The TID increment, I just talked about that, and other funding sources, like you'll see in 2019, if you recall, when we issued the bonds in 2017, we received a premium from the broker, and basically what that is, they actually gave us money up front in place of charging a little bit higher interest rate, coupon interest rate on the bonds because it's more marketable to them, but they compensate us by giving us money up front. And basically with that money, IRS states that you have to use that, transfer it to your debt service fund to pay off the debt service on those bonds. So basically then you'll see over here is really what ends up on our general debt service tax levy. So it's basically our total debt service less any other funding sources is what we levy for debt service. And as you can see in 2020 with the issuance of the bonds and things like that, you'll see that our general debt service tax levy goes up $689,000, which is attributed to what we'd be issuing in 2019. But also, a lot of that is, some of that is that now with the loss increment in the downtown TID, we now have to cover the GO, the $1.3 million that we issued to reconstruct West Grand. So because there's not increment sufficient enough to pay off those, so now we have to levy general debt service for that. So that's factored in there too. And then in 2021, you'll see that it increases $331,000, and that would be directly attributed to the other bond issue in 2020. And then as you can see, I'm not going to go through every year, but then obviously as we go forward, our rate of bonding goes down, the debt service goes down, and obviously then the debt service starts to drop off in later years.
What's the approximate cost per household of $100,000 house, say, that this would add to the debt? Does anybody know?
If you just flip over
you
to
gonna
the
get to
next
that?
page, you'll see
Tim
debt
was a mind
service,
reader.
property tax, $100,000 house.
Page 6.
Okay.
Page 6, that was very tiny.
Oh, there, yeah, nice. Well, I was, okay, yeah, I'll let you finish then.
No, that's it. I was ready to move on, so that was perfect.
All right.
So you'll see there, this on page 6 is basically what happens to debt service tax rate, and then the impact on a $100,000 house. And so that you'll see there in 2019, you know, that's already set for debt service tax rates, $1.28. In 2020, that goes up to $1.92, which on a $100,000 house would be about a $65 increase in their debt, their tax bills attributed to the increase in debt service tax rate.
Okay.
So that's kind of laid out right there. On page 8, more exciting stuff. Basically, this is just laying out what our municipal debt capacity is. And what that is the state of Wisconsin, state statutes dictate that your GO debt cannot be more than 5% of your equalized value. So if you look at, in say 2019, our equalized value is $1,052,000,000. So our maximum debt capacity, which is 5% of that, is $52 million. And then basically subtract off what your GO debt is, that's in column D. And so basically we have available debt capacity of $27.9 million, or 46.9% utilized. With the issuance of, in 2020, that increases to 54.3%. And in 2021, that would increase to roughly 52% before it starts to tail off. Basically, I think our debt policy establishes a maximum of 65%. As a city, we kind of said, 65. When anything over 50%, you start to monitor a little bit, because one of the things that you want to be concerned about is that whenever we issue debt, we have to get a rating from Moody's investor. And they basically assign a rating to our bonds, which has a direct translation to what your interest rates can be. The higher grade you have, the better interest rates you get. I don't think, when I talk to our financial advisor, he's like 50% is not anything, but it's something that, Moody's would say, okay, where are you going with this? And that's why I kind of do this debt projection, so I can say, well, based on what we have planned and in the pipeline, here's what's going to happen over the years. So, and then on page 10 is just a graphical presentation of the history of our outstanding debt. Is obviously the blue vertical bars, and then obviously the red trend line is basically your debt service tax rate. So it's basically taking all that information and just putting it in a graphical presentation there.
All right, a couple more questions. So this is all assuming that we cover the $4 million gap and
Yep,
pay
this
for
is
it
like-
outright without
yep,
any fund?
correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So with that said, looking at page 11, so I would say that I still feel that we can definitely fill that gap. Obviously, we're on a short time frame. The grant out there needed to meet that deadline, but even looking at our debt, if we had to do that in comparison with other municipalities in our area, let's just take Marshfield, for example. Their debt per capita, theirs is $2,200 or $2,229.30. Ours is $976.20. Stevens Point is also higher than us. And this is all assuming that we don't close that $4 million gap with private funding. So not saying anything by that, I think it's just good to put into perspective of our neighbors here.
Yeah, and just to point out, that's based on 2016 data, because the source I get this from is always delayed a couple of years. And so that's why I kind of put down to 2018 to kind of give it more,
Down here.
where we are exactly right now. And so then you'll see that our debt per capita, but obviously still well below those other comparables,
Right.
if you want.
Right.
And it's always nice to compare and see where you rank, and it's always, but it's also what the council and the community is comfortable with, as far as
Right.
what they
Yeah, I
want
was
to pay
just-
for those investments.
I was just pointing that out as, that stuck out on the page to me,
Yep.
and especially that it includes $4 million that we'll be borrowing that we have a support to cover with private.
Well, that's not factored into that
Oh, okay.
calculation because it's,
But the other numbers were right.
these
Okay,
numbers. I'm just saying that the per capita stuff is based on 2016, and then I just based it on where we are right now, 2018, but not factoring in, but
Sure.
just want to be clear about that.
Thank
You know,
you.
page 10, when you look at the red line and the dip between 2008 and 2021, that's the missed opportunity, right? Hindsight is always 20/20, but if, you know, when we were talking pool back in 2008, 2009, and then heavy into 2014, 15, when our tax rate covering what our debt was, that was really the missed opportunity, because everybody's taxes went down as a portion of how much was going to debt service. So, you know, hindsight's always 20/20, but I think history repeats itself, that if at some point, if this isn't addressed, that debt service tax rate is going to come at a most inopportune time when we have an unanticipated capital expense that may be a couple $1,000,000 on top of addressing a pool. So I just, you know, I look at that as the leader today and what we should have been doing and maybe what we could have been doing at that time, and unfortunately that didn't happen, and so now we're here today, and the leaders that are stuck with that decision, and, you know, it is what it is. I think the other component that has been mentioned on the donation that's been pledged, they're willing to consider a decision by the city to cover all or a portion or the balance of the entire project as part of enough information for them to proceed, for us to give them information that we're proceeding. So in talking with that donor, they, said it another way, if the city's willing to commit to proceeding with the project, that is acceptable to them to be able to count as an appropriate decision for the $2.5 million. They had said March 31st or whatever was the end of March was the drop dead date that they granted us for an extension. They're willing to accept a council decision to move forward. They're very interested in this information in terms of what the amount of debt is to the taxpayers. And so in lieu of that, per a previous discussion we had, I asked them to reconsider the level of support, and next Wednesday they're meeting and we'll consider that level of support, because we didn't ask to do the entire project, we asked to build the pool portion. They came back and said, well, you have to build the entire thing to get the $2.5 million. So I responded and I said, well, in lieu of that, can you consider an additional gift? So I don't know, I have no official read on that, but I can say that next Wednesday they'll provide that answer from their board meeting. And then we've also talked about other fundraising efforts, business and industry, and then other foundations. And I think we had long discussed at our last meeting about this is a public facility, not all that different than the other public facilities in our community. And when you go to the donors to give to a public facility, it's viewed differently than if you're building a cultural center, or if you're building a YMCA. You know, it's a public facility that's viewed as the obligation of the municipality. So I tend to subscribe to that thought a little bit, in that donors are not willing to step up to fund what generally people view as a taxpayer's obligation, like a school or like a library or something else. The last point I'll make is, in all the donors we've talked to, what would their appetite to give to the project be if we decided to proceed with construction? And every donor has said to us, it doesn't change our ability or our desire to fund the project. In fact, it may improve it, because if a corporation is going to give a gift of X amount of money, 100,000, 500,000, whatever that number is, to potentially sit on the shelf is a major risk and a liability to them. But a project that says your name will be here June of 2020 gives them far more certainty to support the project. And so I think I'm not going to diminish the risk of proceeding with the project, awarding the bid, and then ultimately the potential that the city will have to borrow the cost. If we were to come out with half of that gap, or over half that gap, or all the gap covered, we're going to look back at this day and say this was the right reason, the right decision to make. It was actually the financially responsible decision to make, as you pointed out, that we're avoiding $500,000 more of cost. It's a tough call, but I think at the end of the day, the community, every person I talk to in this community, from the hygienist in my dental chair this morning that lives in Plover and has visited our splash pad this summer, she told me 4 times a week, people will come to this facility, but it's going to have to require us maybe sticking our necks out there a bit further. And I don't have the full answer, I don't sit in your chairs, but I can say that looking at all the debt information and then talking with all these donors, some as many as 12 times on this darn project, they want to know when a shovel's going to be put in the ground and when they can commit to a project that's actually a project, not a proposal. So those are my comments. I'll leave it at that.
Joe?
So Joe, I just wanted to answer your question. You had asked before if this action would obligate the city. And the direct answer is no. The obligation occurs at the time that you would approve a contract. But I would not take this lightly. You know, politically, I would say, for the interest of the city, this action obligates the city. It doesn't technically, but I think as far as being responsible to contractors, they're going to put together and spend the time to put together a $11 million bid proposal. There's going to be a tremendous investment that they're going to do to present the city that proposal. And so, I just suggest that the decision
Is now.
the decision not be, you're not committing the city by this decision, but I would treat it as if you were.
Just to kind of piggyback on that, I think that if you wanted to proceed with letting the bids, you should feel comfortable with what I present. That because that could be a possibility. We're all hoping that it's not, but because at some point, to sit there and go and let the contractors go through this whole thing, and then kind of to say, well, no. But I mean, if you're going to let the bids, you should be comfortable with that information that was presented.
And in all respect to our contractors, I think we have a responsibility to our taxpayers. To former people sitting in these chairs decided that this is something we're going to do. We borrowed part of the money already. We've spent a lot of time discussing this. So I think that that needs to be considered too. That if we're not even going to let it go out to bid and consider it, we let that money, and we're looking at another $500,000 next year, and who knows what's down the road. So that's
why to me this is almost an agonizing decision, because I was one of those people that I was comfortable with $5 million, and this is potentially another what was the number again? 4.5, 4.5. So yeah, I mean, time is getting short, so.
I think just regarding the motion, I think you're going to need to be more specific. Tim, do you need anything in terms of the debt, or at this point, or just to pursue?
Well, I mean, at some point coming up here real soon, we're going to start to put together.
Right.
If you remember last year, we issued, I think it was a council when we approved the 2018. So I'd probably be looking at the same timing.
Right. So then for today, though, it would be to let it for bid, is
Right.
a specific action based upon the previous plans, or?
When would the award come back? Or when would the bids, I mean, when would we be looking?
It's about a month.
I'm just curious.
Let me just, if you bear with me for a moment.
Because I'm trying to time out with.
I have the schedule too.
Do you have it with you?
Yeah.
I'm guessing it would be May? April, May?
I thought it was like 45 days. It was a week for bid, week or two for advertising, and then 3 weeks for, well, I guess it would be 3 to 4 weeks for advertising, and then they'd be due, but it's
1 month.
1 month. So a month.
The initial schedule was release documents to bidders on January 4th and bids due on February 5th. So 1 month between the time that the documents are released to bidders and the bids would be due.
So when would bid?
So we would have bids due the day of the April Finance Committee meeting.
Okay, so April would be you would have a decision on awarding a contract, which then, obviously if you award the contract, then we would proceed with putting together the financing for it, we probably have a preliminary resolution, because it'd be bonds that would have to be approved, I do believe, in May.
Yeah, we may have to have a special finance committee meeting, because if it were a month and it's approved at council next Tuesday, a month would be council in April. You know, we probably want to have a finance committee meeting maybe that Thursday prior, which would make it a few days short of a month, but I think that'd still be possible.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Well, and we're basing all these assumptions off of obviously the fundraising component, but also assuming that the engineer's estimates are solid, right? These estimates came about over a year ago.
Yes.
They're offering a 3 to 5%, probably, I don't know, 5%. I think we told them to put a 5% cost adjustment in there. Project could be bid less than the engineer's estimates. We're gonna open riverfront bids on Monday, and the last riverfront bid came in right at or a bit above, but ended up being $300,000 short or under budget. You know, so I think there's some, while we're assuming all these things that the project costs are what they are, there's also a couple of other variables there. You know, again, we talked about if the project gets bid over budget, well, that's a whole nother ballgame, but I think, you know, there's an element that it could come in under budget. The cost estimators say no, they're solid in their numbers and confident in their numbers, but.
And if it is the case that it's more, then how bad does that make us look if we do turn them all down?
Well, I
mean,
think
that's
if
a
it's,
different animal.
number one, if it's more than what the city budgeted, I don't think that will deter contractors from, they're gonna ask, what did you budget on this project? They're gonna ask me that question. They're gonna call and ask, what's your budget? And we give it to them, so they know. And if their proposals come in well over budget and that project's denied, that's not uncommon.
Joel?
Thank you.
I would encourage the committee to vote for this, to move it on to the council next week. I guess for the full debate at the council that evening to move it on, because as has been said, if we want to do anything next year, open by next year, I mean, that we have to move this now. And so we can get the bids, let the bids out and get them back and see where we're at. We're not gonna see what comes back until we proceed.
Every expectation that this item will be withheld, so.
Then it'll be withheld.
That it'll be,
It won't be a decision?
can it, well, no, I mean, can
Oh,
it
for
be?
discussion, okay, yeah, okay.
Can we list it separately, is that possible? Or does it have to be just listed with the?
Already made a
I'm
motion.
not sure what you mean.
We'll just have the clerk.
No, I'm talking
create
next
an item
week.
on the-
Yeah,
her
no,
agenda
I'm
that
talking
you're
next week. But I don't know how it works, okay.
So what's the motion now, so?
The motion was to approve looking at financing options, bid letting for the aquatic center project at Whitterfield.
And I second it.
Yep, and you seconded it.
But Sue, did you want to?
Right, I mean, I guess,
your
does that
question.
mean that you want the motion is to proceed with the bid letting for this project and to proceed with financing options, knowing that the financing options are gonna have to come back?
Right, they're gonna come back, we're gonna see what the
Right.
bids are, and then we would decide potentially on a bid at that time, correct?
Right,
Okay.
but I just want to be clear, you're saying to put it out for bid as it was previously presented, the full project, right?
Right, and and I think we have to do it that way due to the grant.
With that, I do anticipate that when we let it for bid, we will let the whole project, but there will be alternate one for the outside the fence, so that it's consistent with what we've been presenting. We've got the in the fence and outside the fence. When we get those numbers, we can look at those individually as well, and it offers the city some flexibility in deciding.
But I think though
I need to put that in my
the
motion.
condition,
Okay.
the grant though was to do everything and they wanted to see that we're going to do everything, so what assurances do they need by the end of the month? I mean, I just.
That's a
yeah.
question that we talked about today, and the preference, or at least the response was, is the city committed to financing the project as it's presented? One, is the city committed to do the project, the whole thing, and then is the city willing to finance the gap that could be there? Because that was the offer from the donor, right? So I think to answer your question, they would like to see it in the motion. And ultimately, whatever the council decides, that's the preference. I can't say if they'd accept anything different.
But I guess the alternate might just give an option to maybe do it
It
later
shows
and
it.
they'll be okay, you know, I mean,
Yeah, I
that might be
mean,
negotiable.
When the bids are open,
Yeah.
if the donors are adamant that, no, it's, we wouldn't fund it, that discussion can happen at council at that time.
Okay,
Does that
so,
make more sense?
so I should revise my motion, no? Okay.
Not necessary.
Well, I think for the sake
Well,
of the
right,
donor.
I think
I
the
think
agenda
there's-
was consider financing options, consider whether
Yeah,
that's.
exactly.
So
Right.
you've decided, you're not considering anymore, you're moving to let the bid and to proceed.
Full
or,
project,
you know,
yep.
Right, with the financing, option, right. Yeah, I guess as long as that's clear.
So,
He seconded it and,
you obviously amend the motion then to include all that Sue just said.
yeah,
And you,
Yeah.
okay.
yeah.
Your motion is, just so I, in my mind, I got the motion right, because I gotta call the donor back tomorrow morning and they're gonna present this to their board. The motion is to proceed with bid letting for the entire scope of the project, perhaps with some alternates or however would be in the best interest of the city ultimately, and to consider financing options for the gap, but to continue to pursue financing or fundraising, sorry, for the project. Right?
Correct,
It's
yeah.
not to
I mean-
finance the whole thing, but I mean, it's implied, but I think it's important for us to get that out in the minutes, that we are going to continue to not only use the money we've already borrowed, but also continue to fundraise. It's just more of semantics, I think, in the minutes.
Yeah,
You've
this is-
implied that, but I think I just want to make sure that
Yeah.
we include that
That's
we absolutely need the rest of the gap financed, or it's going to potentially be on the backs of the taxpayers, right? And so I think donors need to know that, need to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah, I just assumed that with how it was written in the agenda, financing options, that, yeah.
So you're good with that though?
Yep.
And you are too? Okay. Any further discussion or comments? Anybody? Okay, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 3-0. Item number 9 is adjournment. I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And we're adjourned.